Okay, Jack McDougall, why don't you start us off?
Okay, great. Thanks. And thanks everybody for joining us this morning. My name is Jack McDougall, and I'm the president and CEO of the Greater Washington Board of Trade. Very happy to be hosting this series. This is our regional policy leadership series, where we're talking with officials from across the region on important issues that we're dealing with, particularly around the economy and skills and other things that we'll get into today. So thank you for joining us today. Very, very pleased to be hosting Caren Merrick today. She is the Secretary of Commerce and Trade for the Commonwealth of Virginia. And so welcome and thank you for joining us. Also want to recognize McGuireWoods Consulting and McGuireWoods for sponsoring today's conversation, and so we're very much appreciative of that. And I know we have Chris, Jack on with us today for that. And so let me, before we get started, I know Chris Lloyd with McGuireWoods Consulting is going to facilitate today's conversation, and so we appreciate that. But first, to provide more formal introductions, I'd like to introduce Jack White. Jack is the leader of the nationally ranked government investigations and white collar litigation practice for McGuireWoods. And with that, let me turn it over to Jack. Jack.
Well, thanks, Jack. And good morning to all. My name is Jack White. I'm a partner at McGuireWoods LLC. And thank you for being here today for this Regional Policy Leadership Series webinar with the Greater Washington Board of Trade. It's valuable to know how business is growing in our region, and this series of policy-driven conversations enables our region to really understand the issues that our business community faces. Today, our guest is Caren Merrick, Virginia's Secretary for the Department of Commerce and Trade. Caren is a business leader with over 25 years of experience launching growth companies and reinventing businesses in Virginia. She has served as secretary since Governor Glenn Youngkin stepped into office. Her background in working with public-private partnerships in this region will provide us great insight into how Virginia is working to grow business opportunities. And it will allow our audience to really engage about a variety of topics that impact the Greater Washington region's business environment, including the future of work and talent, regional transportation, and the ever-growing digital transformation that businesses are having to adapt to. Now, to interview her today, I'll be turning it over to my friend and colleague, Chris Lloyd. Chris leads the McGuireWoods Consulting Infrastructure and Economic Development team that specializes in site selection and economic development incentive negotiations. Since 1998, Chris has worked on dozens of high-profile corporate expansions and relocations all over the country. And we're excited to have him leading today's discussion with Secretary Merrick. Chris?
Good morning, Jack. And Jack, thank you for that opportunity and for that introduction. I had to throw on a tie and a pocket square today just to compete against Jack White, who's always the most fashionable person and well-dressed person in the room. So it really is a pleasure to be with everybody today to have this opportunity to talk about some of the business issues facing the Greater Washington region, particularly from the Virginia perspective. I'll first say thanks to the Greater Washington Board of Trade for all the leadership that the organization has shown on business issues for what's truly one of America's most vibrant regions. And I think we're going to hear today from Secretary Merrick some important themes regarding the importance of workforce, tech talent, and other ways to move the region forward. It's been my pleasure to have worked with Secretary Merrick previous to her being the Secretary of Commerce and Trade when she was leading the Virginia Ready effort here in Virginia. And as many of you know, she has a deep history in Virginia through being a tech entrepreneur herself with a number of enterprises in the past. With that, I'll go ahead and get started with the questions today. And Secretary Merrick, again, thank you for being with us today and joining us for this opportunity. So first and foremost, as you well know, Secretary Merrick, Virginia, and particularly Northern Virginia, although increasingly other parts of the state as well, really are a hotbed for tech talent. And obviously the greater Washington region ranks among the top 5 in the United States. There have been, as you well know, a number of announcements that you and Governor Youngkin have worked on, whether it's been Boeing or Raytheon, which have relocated their corporate headquarters to the region. Hilton, of course, is expanding its headquarters. And a lot of those decisions have been driven by the tech talent pipeline and opportunities in the region. Can you share with us what the administration is doing to help other businesses relocate to the region? And what is the state, and particularly your office, doing to increase and maintain Virginia's economic competitiveness?
Thank you, Chris. And thank you, Jack, the 2 Jacks and the Greater Washington Board of Trade for inviting me here today. It's just always a delight to be with you, and I admire the work that you're doing. And well said, Chris, we are one of the most highly regarded regions in the country, and we want to continue to keep it that way. And thank you also, Chris, for highlighting the fact that we have had some major wins just since inauguration in January. And Governor Youngkin is a high growth minded businessman. And so our goal is to take Virginia to the next level. And so how do we do that? Well, the first thing that we need to do is understand what our business is looking for when they are either they're already here in Virginia or they are thinking about relocating or opening up a plant. And so what are they looking for? They're looking for sites that are ready. They're looking for an area where their employees want to live and work. They're looking for a business environment where they can flourish that is friendly, tax friendly for them. And they're looking, I believe, for a state government that helps them get to yes, a state government that helps make it easier to do business here in Virginia. And so we have been investing in sites. We have $150 million just this year that was passed in the budget for us to develop sites for businesses to relocate to. We're also looking at Northern Virginia in terms of what are its assets and amplifying those and investing in those. And so we know we have amazing universities in Northern Virginia, and we are working closely with them on a variety of measures to help them train Virginians for in-demand jobs. So we would like to see the outcome in education be a job. And we're working very closely with universities to achieve that. And one other thing that we are working on, particularly in Northern Virginia, is a challenge, and that has to do with housing. That we have had outmigration from Northern Virginia. We think that a large part of that is the cost of housing. So you'll see the governor making some announcements in the near term, particularly in the next legislative session, to help Virginia increase its supply of accessible housing, of affordable housing, and a more abundant housing. I think you're on mute, Chris.
You would think I would have learned that after 3 years. Thank you. So appreciate that. We talked about a number of the large companies that have relocated to the area, Secretary Merrick. Can you also talk about how some of the initiatives that the governor's talking about and you've been working on also help particularly small businesses and startup and entrepreneurial activities? You obviously have a strong entrepreneurial background. What are some of the initiatives, whether it's regulatory reform or other initiatives that you and the governor are working on to make sure that it's all sorts of businesses that are benefiting from these opportunities and the growth in the region?
Oh, I'm glad that you asked that question. And really to paint a bigger picture here for Virginia, Virginia needs to grow. We are hyper focused on growth. We want to grow our economy, we want to grow businesses, and we want to grow our population. Those 3 areas of growth are really important for Virginia, and they're important for all sizes of businesses, whether they're startup to global Fortune 100 companies. And so we're working on a variety of initiatives at the moment. As you know, I do come from Northern Virginia. I'm very, very familiar with what it takes to start and grow a business there. And so we're looking at ways for startups to have access to capital, to have access to mentoring, to have access to the types of networks that will help them to succeed. One of the organizations that I oversee is called the Virginia Innovation Partnership Corporation. And I want everyone on this Zoom call to know that we are going to have an historic amount of funding coming our way from the Department of the Treasury, who has distributed funding across the United States to grow our entrepreneurial ecosystems. So we will be getting close to $200 million over the next 10 years. The first tranche is $25 million, and it is to support entrepreneurial ecosystems. And it is meant to support angel funds and accelerators, and also to make direct investments. So I want everyone who has anything to do with funding startups or is in the startup ecosystem to go to the VIPC website, the Virginia Innovation Partnership Corporation, and learn more about this program, because we want to shore up these entrepreneurial ecosystems, because as we all know, most jobs come from small businesses, and the very successful businesses of the future start as startups. And I would love to see Northern Virginia once again become a powerhouse in terms of our startup growth. So that's a big area that we're working on. We're also working on policies that help small businesses. We want to reduce regulations. We've started an office of the Office of Regulatory Management, and I like to call it the Office of Regulatory Reduction, because we know that small businesses have too many challenges, regulatory challenges that don't make sense. We want regulations that make sense, and so we are working very hard on creating an environment where small businesses can grow. And finally, to talk about talent, we all know, everyone on this call knows that it's a very tight environment for hiring. There's a lot of competition. And so we're looking at ways that we can make it easier for small businesses and businesses of all sizes to find the talent they need. And Chris, you're an expert at this in terms of talent pathways. We're looking at a variety of initiatives. Some of these are pilot projects, which I believe is the way to go to figure out what works in a particular region and a particular industry. We're also looking at how do we help businesses of all sizes take the step to do more internships and apprenticeships. Some industries are very expert at this. And what we'd like to do is define a playbook and help take this idea of internships and apprenticeships to smaller businesses as well. We understand it's a heavy lift for a company to develop a program like that. And so we want to do some pilot projects and help companies figure out how to develop these programs, because it can help solve a lot of problems. If you can get younger people into your business, giving them real hands-on experiential learning opportunities, but also building your own talent pipeline with this internship and apprenticeship methodology.
That's great. Again, appreciate the leadership you're showing in that area. And I think, those kind of investments are ones that, don't happen overnight. They're ones that take a great deal of commitment over time that are going to, but the product of that is going to show up not only in the short term, but also very much in the long term for Virginia and the entire region. I do want to remind everyone that we will allow for questions and answers. So feel free to drop those in the chat. I'll ask one more question, and then I'll turn to some of the questions we're already starting to get. The first and foremost, Secretary Merrick, you talked about the outmigration of talent. And while, again, Northern Virginia and the greater Washington area have been a hub for talent, we've seen in the past few years an outmigration is something that the governor speaks about frequently, and I think actually surprises a lot of people. But when you, frankly, because I think we've all bought into the rhetoric of just this continuous perpetual growth in the region, and the fact that, and as you well know, Jason Alcubey at the Virginia Economic Development Partnership has a presentation that shows that Northern Virginia has lost 30,000 people in the last year. You already touched on housing as one of the areas where the administration is looking to make some reforms. What are other ways? And then, of course, you also talked about the importance of apprenticeships and internships. Can you expand on that outmigration theme and specifically why you think internships and apprenticeships will be helpful to reversing some of those trends, as well as other things that you think might be helpful to re-energizing the economy and making sure that people stay in the greater Washington and the Northern Virginia area and aren't moving to Austin or Columbus, Ohio, or Salt Lake or other tech magnets?
I'm glad, Chris, that you have addressed the main question, which is why? Why are people leaving Northern Virginia? And this kind of data is tough to track. What we can see anecdotally is that housing prices are one of the issues. Another issue is that Northern Virginia is blessed with having a large population of veterans. And the veterans retire at a fairly young age and they can have a second career, but we haven't made it as friendly as other states for them to stay in Virginia, particularly with the cost of living. And so if you're looking at the veteran population, in this past legislative session, we passed a bill that would offer a tax break on veterans' retirement benefits. We were one of only 13 states that didn't offer this benefit. And so if you're a veteran and you're shopping around for a state to live in, you're probably going to choose one that isn't going to tax your retirement benefits as much. And so we're on that path to making Virginia a more friendly place for veterans to stay. And I expect that you will see more out of the Youngkin administration in terms of how we incent veterans to stay. And this is something that we can do and work with businesses as well, because businesses have a role to fulfill as the organizations that actually do the hiring. And so look for more of that in the future in terms of how we incent veterans to stay here. That's a big piece of it. Another anecdotal reason that we believe why Virginia is losing population is because it's an older population and people are retiring. And when they retire, when they really are at retirement age, they're moving. And so what we need to do is think about how do we draw in more people into Northern Virginia. It's got a remarkable culture. It's really got something for everyone. And I would like to see us retaining more of our Virginia graduates in Virginia and having them in Northern Virginia. Because if you look at the metrics too, not all Virginia graduates are staying in Virginia. And especially the ones that are coming from outside the state, we want them to stay here. We want them to find good work here. And again, through internships and through apprenticeships and through connecting more with the business community while they're here. And so those are a few of the things that we're looking at in terms of how do we retain people in the Northern Virginia region, which also, when getting back to your first questions about what do businesses want when they are looking to expand or where they're looking to relocate to Virginia, a region like Northern Virginia offers just about everything they're looking for. It's such a diverse economy. It's diverse in terms of quality of life and the types of things that people like to do. Northern Virginia has everything. It's got marinas, it's got mountains, it's got rivers, it's got great arts, it's got hiking. And so I would also like to see us market Northern Virginia with even more imagination than we're doing now.
Great. Starting with some of the questions that have been coming in, obviously you've talked about the importance of affordable housing initiatives and what the governor is going to be doing on that, and workforce talent pathways sort of initiatives. What could members of the Greater Washington Board of Trade, the business leaders and other people that are very active in the community, what can they be doing to support these initiatives, whether it's at the state level, at the local level, interactions through initiatives like Go Virginia or the Virginia Chamber, other things? How can they be helpful to those initiatives?
I would say there are a variety of ways that companies can be helpful. The first one is look at your own company and how you're hiring and who you're hiring. Are you requiring people to have a bachelor's degree that really don't need one? Bank of America did a study and showed that more than 95% of their employees don't need a bachelor's degree. And so a lot of companies are looking at that. What are the requirements for hiring? Are there barriers that companies themselves can be removing in terms of hiring? And then another way to look at it is, if you're not going to hire based on a bachelor's degree, what are you going to hire on? Well, skills. And how do you find the people who have the skills that you need for your business? And there are a variety of ways of doing that. I'm a big believer in the community college system, and that businesses should be much more highly engaged in the community college system, because these are institutions that are set up to scale. And they have accelerated training programs already, but what they're lacking is a lot of connection with the business community. I also think that when you look at the labor shortage that Virginia is facing, and certainly Northern Virginia is as well, there's always a competition, particularly for tech talent. We had this in all of the businesses that I've been at have been tech companies, and there's always been a great war for talent. And so again, I think if companies get more involved in helping to train the talent, and one way of doing that is to consider lending some of your professionals to the community college system as instructors for some of these accelerated training courses, particularly the training courses in technology. The Northern Virginia Community College System has something called the Fast Forward program, which is accelerated training for credentials in a variety of industries. And there's a lot of credentials in tech. And so I would say, I would want every company to know what's out there. And I've just mentioned one, which is the community college system. But I would also like to see more businesses sharing what they're doing in terms of apprenticeships and internships. We recently hosted a company here called Hepburn and Sons from Northern Virginia, and they have an imaginative apprenticeship internship program. And they have hired, I think, 4 people so far through this program. And they're a very small business. And so it can be done. I'd like for us to share more information about that, but not only the state government, but the business community to share information on how are you setting up these internship and apprenticeship programs? Are there economies of scale that companies can go in together on and form these programs?
Great, thank you. Building on that a little bit, we have also received one question. Obviously, you and the governor have shown a great deal of leadership on the Petersburg initiative with outreach to minority communities. Can you talk about some of the other initiatives that the administration has with regards to minority and small business outreach?
Yes, we have actually several initiatives underway. And one of them is that we are hosting a series of roundtables throughout the Commonwealth. I actually did one in Northern Virginia a few months ago for minority business owners. And then the other aspect that I want you to know about is getting back to something I said earlier, which is the Virginia Innovation Partnership Corporation, this $25 million, which is aimed at funding new businesses or seed funds. A specific goal of that fund is to support minority and women-owned businesses and entrepreneurs. And so again, go to the Virginia Innovation Partnership Corporation website and learn more about that.
Great. Secretary Merrick, your colleague, Secretary Cummings, Secretary of Finance of Virginia, appeared before the Money Committees a couple of weeks ago and talked about the revenue picture. Virginia ended last year in a very good position, and so far we're holding up pretty well. But there are some warning signs, or lights are starting to flash regarding a potential recession. It remains to be seen how Virginia will weather that. Typically, in the past, Virginia has done fairly well in a recession, but usually then coming out of a recession, we don't recover as quickly as other states. What are some of the things that you and the governor are thinking about in order to, you can't maybe recession-proof Virginia, but to make sure that we remain strong and continue to remain focused on a number of economic development goals during any potential economic downturn?
So we think about this on 2 separate tracks. The first one is we are highly engaged with the CEOs of certainly the top 200 companies in Virginia, but also with all of the companies thinking about moving here. The governor and I do calls with them to put our finger on the pulse, to understand what are their needs, to understand what are they seeing on the front lines, to understand their hiring plans, to understand their growth plans. We also convene economists on a regular basis. We just did that within the last couple of weeks. We have 2 organizations, state organizations of economists that have kind of been dormant. And now we're meeting with them on a quarterly basis to hear from economists from the state about what they're seeing, about what their expertise is showing. So we're very, very focused on what is occurring here in Virginia. And part of how we're navigating these uncertain times is we want to run this government like a business. So we have established monthly management reviews with every agency head. We have looked at all of the procurement going on in the state of Virginia. We have 13,000 contracts. We're looking for economies of scale. We're looking for where we can consolidate contracts. We're looking at ways to save money. And so when we do these monthly management reviews with agency heads, they are reporting in a way they've never been asked to report before, which is how are you spending your money? What are your top procurements? What are your hiring plans? Where are ways that you can save money? Where are ways that we need to be investing with you to achieve your goals? And so we have a really good view into what's happening in our state government. Now, we did have a surplus and we did offer tax refunds to Virginians. And I hope that everyone who qualifies has received their funding. The second, or the refund check, I guess, if you will. The second track, though, that I want to be clear on is that we want to win. We want Virginia to win. We don't want to just bump along and think that we've done so far so good, because when you look at the recovery from the pandemic, Virginia hasn't done that well. And you saw those state education numbers that were released earlier this week. The pandemic hurt Virginia. And so in this pandemic recovery, we are paying very close attention to our competing states like North Carolina, South Carolina, Tennessee, even Florida and Texas, Georgia. Those states where we have lost opportunities to win big deals in manufacturing. So we are hyper-focused on winning. We want Virginia to win these deals. We want Virginia to have the environment to win these deals. And we know that there are a variety of strategies that we want to follow, but strong fiscal management, as you described our Secretary of Finance appearing before the Money Committee, that strong fiscal management is a big part of how we're going to win.
Great, thank you. You've talked several times, Secretary Merrick, about the importance of affordable housing. And while that's important, it's sometimes affordable housing has some negative connotations for some people, which is very unfortunate. But as a site selector, what I'm hearing from our clients is the importance of workforce housing. How would you differentiate that? And are you hearing that from companies looking at Virginia, that they're concerned about the cost of, you already did mention that to some degree in Northern Virginia, but it's not just in Northern Virginia. Are they expressing concerns about, where their workers going to live? And can you talk a little bit more? You talked about some regulatory reform initiatives and other things. What other initiatives do y'all have on that kind of workforce housing front?
Yes, and Chris, I am so glad you said that for workforce housing, because that's a term that I mean to use. Because to me, affordable housing has come to mean something different to different people. It is workforce housing. It is workforce housing that needs to be accessible. And so we're looking at what is impacting the supply of workforce housing in Virginia. And there are again, ask why. Why are we where we are at the moment? And part of it has to do with local issues of zoning, and another part of it has to do with how are we spending the money that we have allocated for housing in Virginia. And we don't actually pay for housing, but we can offer a variety of tax benefits to developers. We're looking at that. We're looking very carefully at the financing situation and how we are making our tools more available to developers. And we're also looking at issues like workforce. Every developer that I know has a labor shortage of construction workers, for example. And so we're looking at it across those areas. The other data point I would give you is that if you look at housing developments across Virginia, they're not always matched with where the good jobs are. And so we're looking at aggregating all of what we're doing in economic development in a more holistic regional cluster way, so that we just had a big announcement about Lego moving into Virginia. And so shortly thereafter, I was looking at some housing programs and it was very competitive. And so I said, let's pick the ones that are near where this big plant's going, where we're going to have over 2,000 employees to develop workforce housing there. We are open to a variety of bold ideas on how we help solve the housing shortage. And we have the Governor's Housing Conference is coming up in November. I think it's the 17th or 18th. Chris, do you know the exact day?
I do not know the exact date.
It's the 16th.
That sounds about right. Yes.
And the governor will be speaking there. I will be on a panel there, and we want to unveil a few more ideas of what we're thinking on how we solve the housing shortage. Again, though, it's going to require everyone. I even believe that there's an opportunity for companies to help with housing. If you look at what Pella is doing in Iowa, Pella, the window maker, you probably have seen their stickers on new homes. Pella actually did build some workforce housing, and companies in the past did do that. And there may be a much bigger role for businesses to fulfill in not only workforce talent pipeline, but also in workforce housing.
You're absolutely right, Secretary Merrick. I'm hearing that out of our clients, and we're not talking about, the old company towns of yesteryear, but really, innovative public-private partnerships to develop those workforce housing solutions. So they're very much starting to take hold across the country. We're still getting a number of questions coming in. One asked us about the Virginia Port Authority, which is obviously Virginia's gateway to the world and a real economic engine. Can you talk about some initiatives, obviously, that while the Virginia Port Authority is not part of your technical portfolio, obviously the economic development engine that it is very much impacts everything that you can do. Can you talk about international trade and the importance of that, not only to the Virginia economy, but you've seen an alliance in Georgia where Savannah really linked up with Atlanta for a partnership on growing that port. Obviously, that opportunity exists for the Port of Virginia to look to Northern Virginia and the Greater Washington area as codependent upon each other. Can you talk about the governor's commitment to the ports and what opportunities you see there with regard to international trade?
Yes, the port is really one of the best ports in the world, and it's soon going to be the fastest, deepest port on the East Coast. We're working on that right now. We have a variety of initiatives underway with the port. The first one is we formed a capture team to work closely with the port on the sites that are available all around the port. And so we want to prioritize the sites that we should develop and then market those sites, because those sites are highly sought after. But previously there, as you know, Chris, all too well, Virginia hasn't been investing in sites the way that it should be. And so we're looking at that. We would like to see that whole area in Hampton Roads develop, because companies move to Virginia, not just for the land and the incentives of the actual manufacturing plant. They want workforce housing, they want quality of life. And we think that the Hampton Roads area is a good one for that. We are also working closely on a corridor between Richmond and the ports as well. And we're also looking at international trade. And we look at that obviously in two ways. We look at how can we help Virginia companies export more? And we're only numbered 24 out of 50 states. We've got work to do, but we've got our eye on that. And we're developing plans now to increase what we export. But we're also looking at more foreign direct investment. And what does that bring us? And you see some really innovative things happening with the ports. I don't know if you all are aware, but right there in Northern Virginia, there's something called Z-Box, and it's a remarkable accelerator right in Crystal City, funded by some of the biggest companies that do business with the port and other supply chain companies. And it's meant to be an accelerator for entrepreneurs in the logistics and supply chain space. And it's right there in Crystal City with a direct connection to our ports. So I'd love to see more of that in Virginia, where we have this cross-regional cooperation for economic development.
Secretary Merrick, you already spoke a little bit about the governor's personal commitment to reaching out to CEOs to get them to invest in the state. And then you just now touched on foreign direct investment. What are some of the trends you're seeing, in the characteristics of foreign direct investment, looking at, Virginia or the United States, and how can the region position itself to benefit from some of those trends? What are those drivers that are out there? What are you and the governor hearing as y'all talk to other business executives?
Well, I'm happy to report that there's a lot of positive momentum toward the governor for his business acumen, for his business experience, for his accessibility. He'll give his cell phone number out to every single CEO that we talk to, for the fact that he really identifies with what keeps them up at night. And as do I. It's real. I have to say, it's a great joy to be serving in the state government and speaking with people who have started and grown businesses as I have, and we're all on the same page. And they appreciate that. They appreciate it greatly. They also appreciate the many, many assets that Virginia already possesses and offers, with our great university education system, with our business-friendly environment, with the fact that our Virginia Economic Development Partnership is a really high-performing economic development organization. And what they're telling us, though, could surprise some. One of the top things they want to know about is energy. Where am I going to get my energy to run my manufacturing plant or to run my business? How does Virginia's energy policy support my zero clean energy goals, zero emissions clean energy goals? And the governor recently announced his energy plan, and it's bold, and it's an all of the above energy plan that makes it quite clear that businesses will have a variety of choices to meet their energy needs. And it also has the moonshot of us having the first small modular nuclear reactor in Southwest Virginia. And that is spurring a lot of innovation in and of itself. And so the energy, obviously, companies always want to know about workforce. And we have something in Virginia that you all should know about if you don't, and it's called the Talent Accelerator. And it is through the Virginia Economic Development Partnership, where we will help a company in Virginia that's growing or that is seeking to relocate here, we'll help them with their hiring. We will do deep dive interviews. We'll help them with hiring. We'll help them with training. We will make connections with training providers. We will create a website to help them recruit. We use some qualitative research to help them. And it's got very high success rates. So much so that I've been saying we should have talent accelerators in other regions of Virginia, particularly Northern Virginia.
Great, thank you. You talked, Secretary Merrick, I'm glad, thank you for bringing up the Virginia Energy Plan, because you're right, that is extremely important. Can you also talk a little bit about going back to the talent pipeline? Again, we talked earlier about mostly focus on the tech sector, but you mentioned when we were actually kicking off this call before we started that you're going to be meeting with some people in the maritime industry soon. Can you talk about some other focus areas that the state has for potential growth and what the state's doing to grow the talent pipeline in those target sectors as well?
Well, yes. And Chris, as you know all too well, talent is regional. It's not, you don't have the same talent needs in every region. And so again, we have to look at Virginia as in terms of regional clusters. And these regional clusters are each unique. There's no one size that fits all. And yes, in the Hampton Roads area, there's a lot of shipbuilding going on. There's a lot of manufacturing and skilled trades types of skills that we need there. And so our workforce program now is being completely overhauled. And that is being run by Secretary Brian Slater. He's the Secretary of Labor, which, oh, by the way, I think we should call that the Secretary of Workforce. And we're working very closely with him and the Secretary of Education to develop talent pipeline strategies in each of these regions so that the businesses in each of these regions are informing the educational system. They are informing the workforce system there, because most of you probably know we get tens, if not hundreds of millions of dollars a year from the federal government aimed at workforce training. And every region has these federal dollars in these workforce programs. And so what we're doing is we're aligning these programs so that they're much more closely integrated with what businesses need. Businesses are the customer. They're the customer. What we want is for Virginia to help develop a talent pipeline so that Virginians have skills to get jobs. And that to me is really the ultimate outcome of an education or a workforce program. And I think for far too long, we haven't been measuring for that. We've been measuring for attendance at programs and signups and things like that, or people who attend something, but we're not measuring, are these programs giving Virginians skills so that they can go get a job with a company in Virginia, and even beyond that, so that they can stay at that job and grow and flourish in that job.
Absolutely. And obviously that helps to address some of the outmigration and other challenges we were talking about earlier. Related to talent, and again, we're still getting a lot of questions coming in. So related to talent, obviously one issue that everybody thinks about when they think about talent is how the workforce has changed in the past few years, particularly the increase towards remote work. Fortunately, Virginia has not seen the drop off of people leaving metro areas that you've seen in some other states, although we do have some outmigration attributable to some of the factors you've talked about earlier, Secretary Merrick. How is the state adjusting some of its thinking about talent in a remote or a hybrid work environment? How is the state looking at it from an incentives perspective? And what are some of the ways that the state can be involved in getting people back to work? The governor speaks about the reduction in workforce participation in the state, and that's been a major challenge holding Virginia back, that we still we aren't back to as many jobs as we had pre-COVID. Can you talk about some of those topics a little bit?
Yes. There is a labor shortage across the country. Every state is feeling it. However, Virginia's labor force participation rate is at historic lows, and our competing states, the ones I mentioned earlier, the ones that we pay very close attention to, we have an economic data book that's that thick. I mean, we measure and compare ourselves constantly on a variety of metrics. Take North Carolina, for example. Their labor force participation rate is lower than Virginia, but they have not only filled all the jobs that were lost during COVID, but they've exceeded that. We still haven't filled all of those jobs that were lost. So we have 300,000 open jobs in Virginia. We have 100,000 more Virginians working than we did on Inauguration Day. So we're heading in the right direction, and we're delighted about that. But you have to take a look at, what are companies looking for? What do they need? So they know what they need and want. And what do employees need and want, right? And then you have to match those two. You have to look at those two. And so we're taking a look at that in our workforce training. We're working with something called the Virginia Office of Education Economics, which is state of the art in terms of gathering data and analyzing data, because we want to go beyond what is the anecdotal data. We want to really understand. And we've mentioned a few of the issues in terms of retention and talent pipeline. I do believe that we can be very imaginative in attracting talent, regardless of what the region is in Virginia. For example, in the tobacco region, those regions in Virginia that were formerly tobacco farmers, and it was a big, big business in Virginia, and that is wound down. But in the tobacco region, they have used funding to recruit and retain people to move to that region and have a job. And here's how they do it. They offer $12,000 a year of your student loan repayment if you will come and live in that region for 4 years. So someone with student loan debt, which is most students, can go and live in one of these regions and get $48,000 over 4 years to help pay off their student loans. And of course, these regions are beautiful. And I encourage all Northern Virginians to get to know the rest of Virginia better if you haven't. Virginia is a remarkably beautiful state. And so I would say that I use that as an example of what one organization is doing, the Tobacco Revitalization Commission, to help recruit and retain people into these rural areas. But there are other ideas I think that we can think about. And from a state perspective, if we want to get serious about recruiting and retaining people, let's just think outside the box. What would become possible for Virginia if we said, all right, anyone who's graduated from a Virginia institution, come back to Virginia and we'll give you a tax break for the first 5 years. I'm just pulling that out of the sky. We're actually working as a little think tank here in the Youngkin administration right now on all of these types of policies. And I'm thinking that we are going to need to be more bold and more imaginative. Now, when I say those sorts of incentives, I'm saying, I'm making the assumption that someone's motivated by that, by this financial savings. Maybe that's not what motivates them. Maybe it's something else. Maybe it's living in a beautiful region here in Virginia in a rural area and working in a remote job. But again, my call to action for companies is, companies are the ones with the innovative ideas and the innovative DNA. And I'd like for us to work together on some imaginative ideas. Maybe there's a way that we as the state government could offer a tax incentive to companies that build imaginative internships or apprenticeship programs. So again, I welcome ideas, particularly from the private sector, on how we tackle these problems together.
You mentioned, Secretary Merrick, earlier the importance of regional collaboration, that workforce markets are regional in nature, but also sharing best practice and the importance of that. Obviously, the Greater Washington Board of Trade is all about the region itself. What do you see as opportunities for some of the issues you talked about that are important to Virginia, about how we can work with our partners in Washington, D.C. and Maryland on some of those topics?
That's a terrific question. And I want to shine a light on the extraordinary, groundbreaking collaboration that occurred to win Amazon HQ2, which is not fully open yet, but parts of it are operational. And that was extraordinary. The region in Northern Virginia worked together in a whole new way. And it continues to generate benefits. I've met with a lot of the business leaders and the economic development experts, and there's a lot of opportunity to collaborate. I would like to see us collaborate in that way to form perhaps like a research triangle park, like what they have in North Carolina, or maybe to dig into the biosciences together as a region and pursue that. I know there are organizations that are wanting to do this type of collaboration regionally with quantum computing or hydrogen technologies. And so I think that the Greater Washington Board of Trade is very well positioned to bring together, to convene the right group of people to help solve these problems together, or to tackle opportunities to bring certain types of industries to our region where everyone is going to benefit.
Great. Obviously, I'm incredibly biased, having been a staff person in the Secretary of Commerce and Trade many moons ago. So I think the Secretary of Commerce and Trade is the coolest job in state government. What do you find most exciting about your job, and what's been the biggest surprise to you as you've gotten into this position, Secretary Merrick?
Well, thank you for your service, Chris.
Many years ago, many
A
years ago.
variety of ways. What has been just a great joy is to travel throughout Virginia and to see imagination and innovation in every corner, to see that there's a lot of resilience, to see that we have a lot to offer. And I knew Virginia was a remarkable state, and I thought I understood. And so I would say the biggest surprise is that Virginia has remarkable things to see and do. And I think we should do a better job in Northern Virginia of marketing the rest of Virginia, because I think there are reasons why Northern Virginians don't necessarily know. Like, how many people have been to Bristol, or South Boston, or to the Speedway? I'm actually heading to the Speedway down in Martinsville on Sunday. And these were just things I didn't have an awareness of. And oh, by the way, I want to say in Richmond, you should come and spend a couple long weekends down here. Chris, you can tell everyone that since that's where you work. We have some remarkable museums and trails and nightlife and great food as well. And so I would say I'm just very honored to to have this opportunity to serve. And the big surprise is how much more to Virginia there is than Northern Virginia.
Great. I'll ask one last question, then I'm going to give you the final word. One question has come into the chat regarding the importance of data centers. Are obviously very important to Northern Virginia economy. And what kind of activity level are you seeing, and what's the administration doing to keep that growth going, particularly when you see other regions, Atlanta, Phoenix, Chicago, others starting to grab some of that growth?
Data centers are very, very important in Northern Virginia to us. And you may have read that there are some energy issues. Remember, I was talking about energy a few minutes ago and how important it is to companies. And Dominion Energy announced that they were having some forecasting issues. And so we're on that. We're meeting almost daily with a data center representative or Dominion Energy, or often both, to resolve that problem. And data centers are very, very important to us. That you will see them expanding to other parts of Virginia simply because they need it. They need more land. They need a lot more land, and it's more affordable outside of Northern Virginia, as we all know. And so we want to support a diverse set of industries in Northern Virginia and do everything we can. Every day I say to myself, I wake up and I think, I have like a couple of organizing principles. And the first one is, how do we get to yes? If you're a company in Virginia, or a prospective founder, or you're someone who wants to move a company to Virginia, my goal is to get to yes. I want to figure out, how do we get to yes in a way that's a win-win? And the second question I ask myself is, what can we do to help you flourish as a business here in Virginia? And coming from Northern Virginia, I'm of course very interested in what happens in Northern Virginia. And by the way, I plan to be spending a little more time there. I have an apartment here in Richmond. And so I'm in Richmond Monday through Friday, but I'm really looking forward to spending more time in Northern Virginia and helping our businesses out there grow.
Great. Thanks, Secretary Merrick. Before I turn it back over to Jack McDougall to close us out, I wanted to see if you had any parting comments. Again, I know everyone really appreciates the energy and the enthusiasm and the leadership that you and Governor Youngkin are providing on a lot of these issues. Is there any closing thoughts you wanted to share with the group before we turn it back over to Jack?
Well, yes, I have a challenge for everyone here. And it's this: what would become possible for us if we work together more closely to solve these problems? What would become possible for your business and for Northern Virginia if you got a group of your colleagues in a room, or a group of your fellow business leaders in a room, and you said, let's whiteboard how to solve these problems. Let's imagine the government isn't even going to get that involved. What would become possible if we took the initiative and the leadership and the ownership to solve some of these problems? Not to say that you're not already doing that, but what would become possible if you did it on a whole new level? Because right now, for the next 3.5 years, you have a highly skilled team of business people who understand the shoes that you walk in and who want to work with you to solve problems and to build whole new ways of doing things that will far outlast the four-year term that we have. Thank you very much for inviting me to spend time with you. And please reach out with any ideas or questions or suggestions.
Great. Thanks, Secretary Merrick. And Jack, I'll turn it back to you, and maybe you can even take up what role the Board of Trade can play in meeting that challenge the Secretary's.
Sure, that's great. And Chris, thank you so much for facilitating a really interesting and compelling conversation. Appreciate that. And Secretary Merrick, thank you for joining us and sharing your thoughts and insights with us today. Appreciated that. And Jack White, Jim Dyke from McGuireWoods, very much appreciate you sponsoring today's conversation. Our next conversation will be with Chairman Mendelson of the DC Council on November 2nd. And Secretary Merrick, you know, as you and I have talked about a few times now, we stand ready to work with you to meet those challenges. And when you think holistically about what our region has to offer, we really are a global economic powerhouse. So we need to align our assets and resources more effectively so we can achieve that potential. And so we stand ready to do that with you. So with that, I'm going to close out today's conversation and thank everybody for joining, and I'll look forward to seeing you all soon. All the best. Thanks.